Well, we're going to talk a lot today about change. What do you need to be aware of in terms of employee perceptions of change and the impact of change on employees? You've talked a bit about mental health, so I guess that's part of it.
Yeah, so the mental health perspective. So if we look at the statistics, and everyone will have read this in the news, that the mental health statistic, it's all indicators are pointing the wrong directions, whether it's stress, anxiety, antidepressant usage, suicidal thoughts, the working from home burnouts, all indicators are pointing the wrong direction. So most countries see a doubling of people who, for example, report stress, anxieties, and it's especially the teens and our youngsters in their 20s who are overrepresented, who are suffering even more. And then you have the group who reports they're doing fine. But my experience having one-on-ones with leaders and business professionals is that they're not, especially now that we're going into the second winter of this pandemic, is what I hear more and more of, and I'm waiting for the big research report to show this, that people are just tired. What I get back most is that people say, I'm just so tired, I'm just hanging in there. And what you get is with people who are just barely hanging in there, so they don't have a burnout yet, they're not, they haven't reported sick, they're hanging in there, is that you need mental energy for change. So if, for example, you're changing because you're going back to the office or the employer asks you to go hybrid, you need energy for that. And most people, their energy batteries are completely drained. And this is not a good time to ask for behavioral change, whether it's from employer's perspective, but also if you are a business and you have a great new product or service, you want to sell it, and a behavioral change is needed for that. This is not the time.
Just another complexity to add to the conundrum, really, isn't it? I mean, obviously, as you said, we talked about at the start, we've gone through the biggest forced experiment in human history, I guess, certainly around when it comes to working from home and everything else. And the workforce, as you've alluded to, experienced some massive disruptive change around that. What do we have to be cognizant of as we ask employees how to shift to either hybrid work models or returning to office? Because it does seem that there is a growing disconnect, for example, between leaders and their workforces around these topics.
Yes. So there are a few things at play here. So one is that most of the organizations I work with, and these are the larger corporations like IKEA and Vodafone, Morgan Stanley, Microsoft, these big ones, they ask their employees what they want. How are you doing? Employee engagement service. And what do you think of this remote working? When we go back to the office, how much would you like? But the big mistake they make is that you should never ask people in a crisis situation what they want when the crisis is over. And if you would compare this to, let's say, a flooding or an earthquake, you should not ask people right after the earthquake or the flooding what they would want when all the mess is cleaned up and we are, a year ahead. So the thing is that with most of these surveys that people get in front of them, they overestimate their own desire to work from home. So with most of my clients, the engagement surveys show, well, we'd like to do 50-50, or I'd like to be for 3 or 4 days. So the majority of my work, I'd like to do it from home. While from a mental health perspective, the social psychologist like myself would advise the opposite. We advise do the majority of your work at an office to have a healthy, you have your work situation and you have your private situation, and a clear distinction between that. A commute, as we know from research, is great for your mental well-being. No commute is not a good thing. It's good to be with colleagues. Yes, there might be a traffic jam. Yes, you might be in that open office but that is hard to concentrate in. But for your mental well-being as a whole, it's a good thing. But then you have the engagement surveys which show the opposite, and they give the leaders the impression that their workers actually, they like to do 50-50 or like to spend most of their time working from home. Great. Now we can close half of our office space. I have a client in the US, they closed down 80% of all their office space. And they say, well, we're only going to do 20% of work post-pandemic will be at the office. We asked our employees, they're fine with that. And I think that's very much not a wise thing to do. I think the best thing to do is to say, take the coming months and maybe even years as an experiment and say, all right, we're going to experiment with hybrid work, and we're going to ask you along the go what you think. But I seriously think leaders should, force is not the right word, nudge their people back to the office, get them in there, and only after a few weeks or a few months ask them, all right, so now what's your experience? Are you still, what would you like now? And not ask them in a crisis situation. Well, they've been working from home for 18, 19, 20 months.
In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.